The forgotten Hollywood mansion, too grand to survive. Pickfair. The last party at Pickfair ended not with champagne toasts but with the grinding teeth of bulldozers. On a gray March morning in 1990, wrecking crews positioned their machines around what had once been Hollywood's Buckingham Palace. A 42-room mansion where Charlie Chaplin had done handstands by the pool, where Albert Einstein had discussed relativity over brandy, where the Crown Prince of Japan had bowed to America's sweetheart. The Mediterranean Revival Estate, sprawling across 18 acres in Beverly Hills, had cost $35,000 to build in 1919, equivalent to $600,000 today. But its true value couldn't be measured in dollars. This was Pickfair, the mansion that invented celebrity culture as we know it, the house that taught Hollywood how to live like royalty while hiding the servants who made it possible. As the first wall fell, exposing a bathroom where Amelia Earhart once freshened up before dinner, a question hung in the dust. How did the most famous house in America become too legendary to survive? Chapter 1. The Kingdom on Summit Drive. Beverly Hills, 1920. The morning fog rolled back from Summit Drive like a theater curtain, revealing America's newest fairy tale. There, commanding views from the Santa Monica Mountains to the Pacific, stood Pickfair, part mansion, part fortress, part movie set for the greatest romance Hollywood had ever produced. Mary Pickford stood on the terrace that January morning, watching gardeners plant the last of 14,000 rose bushes. At 27, she was the most powerful woman in entertainment history, earning $350,000 per picture when a factory worker made $200 a year. Beside her, Douglas Fairbanks, 37, practiced fencing moves with his shadow, his famous grin flashing in the California sun. Together they weren't just movie stars, they were American royalty, and Pickfair was their Versailles. But this wasn't supposed to exist. Just 18 months earlier, both were married to other people. The scandal of their affair had threatened to destroy both careers. Studio executives warned that America wouldn't forgive its sweetheart for being a homewrecker. Religious groups called for boycotts. Yet here they stood, more famous than ever, in a house that would redefine what fame meant. The statistics alone staggered visitors. The main house contained 25 rooms initially, later expanded to 42. The grounds included a 100-foot swimming pool, the first private pool in Beverly Hills, where Fairbanks would perform his famous diving exhibitions. 4 separate guest houses dotted the property. The staff quarters, discreetly hidden behind Italian cypress trees, housed 14 full-time servants. The monthly operating cost exceeded $3,000 in 1920 dollars, more than most Americans earned in 2 years. Yet the numbers told only part of the story. Pickfair represented something unprecedented in American culture: the complete fusion of private life and public fantasy. Every dinner, party became front-page news. Every renovation sparked national trends. When Pickford installed a beauty salon, thousands of women across America demanded the same. When Fairbanks built a gymnasium, physical fitness became fashionable among the wealthy. The mansion's guest book read like a who's who of the 20th century. Lord and Lady Mountbatten honeymooned in the West Wing. F. Scott Fitzgerald scribbled story ideas on cocktail napkins in the library. Babe Ruth hit golf balls from the lawn while discussing his salary with Fairbanks. Both men earned more than the President of the United States. But beneath the glittering surface, Pickfair operated on a careful orchestration of illusion. The servants, predominantly Mexican and Filipino immigrants, entered through a separate road, invisible to guests. They worked 14-hour days maintaining the fantasy, their names rarely recorded, their stories never told. The kitchen staff began preparations at 4 a.m. for parties that wouldn't start until sunset. The head gardener, Alejandro Morales, managed a team of 8 men who ensured not a single dead rose petal marred the view. though his monthly salary of $45 barely covered his family's rent in Los Angeles. The house itself became a character in the American imagination. Newspapers devoted entire sections to Life at Pickfair. Radio programs broadcast from its gardens. When Pickford changed the dining room wallpaper from French silk to hand-painted Chinese panels at a cost of $15,000, interior decorators from New York to San Francisco reported a surge in Oriental design requests. This was intentional. Pickford, despite her innocent image, possessed one of the sharpest business minds in Hollywood. She understood that Pickfair wasn't just a home. It was a brand, a dream factory that manufactured desire as efficiently as any movie studio. Every photograph released to the press was carefully staged. Every story about their domestic bliss was crafted to reinforce their image as America's perfect couple. As 1920 drew to a close, Pickfair stood as the undisputed center of Hollywood society. But empires built on dreams have fragile foundations, and the very fantasy that made Pickfair irresistible would eventually make it impossible to sustain. Chapter 2. The architect of dreams before Pickfair could become a legend, it had to become a house. The story begins not with its famous owners, but with Wallace Neff, a 25-year-old architect who would transform California living while remaining largely invisible to the public who adored his creations. Neff came from California aristocracy. His grandfather was Andrew McNally of Rand McNally fortune. But young Wallace rejected the family business for architecture, studying in Europe before returning to Pasadena with a vision: to create homes that merged Spanish colonial heritage with modern American luxury. When Pickford and Fairbanks approached him in 1919, he saw an opportunity to build not just a house, but an entirely new architectural vocabulary for the American elite. The original hunting lodge that stood on the property, a modest 4-bedroom structure Fairbanks had purchased for $35,000, would be completely reimagined. Neff's plans called for stucco walls 3 feet thick, hand-carved wooden ceilings imported from Spain, and a revolutionary indoor-outdoor design that brought California's climate into the architecture itself. Every room would open onto gardens or terraces. The boundaries between house and landscape would dissolve. But Neff faced an immediate crisis. Pickford and Fairbanks wanted the renovation completed in 6 months before their March 1920 wedding. This timeline was impossible by conventional methods. Neff's solution revealed both the innovation and exploitation that built Hollywood. He assembled a workforce of 200 men, primarily Mexican craftsmen who had fled the revolution, willing to work for $2 a day, half the union rate. They labored in 2 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, through the winter rains of 1919. The construction site operated like a film production. Fairbanks, fresh from shooting The Mark of Zorro, would arrive at dawn to practice stunts on the scaffolding, terrifying insurance agents. Pickford managed the interior design with the same precision she brought to her film productions, maintaining detailed ledgers of every expense. She negotiated directly with suppliers, using her fame to secure discounts while demanding perfection. The material choices reflected both opulence and innovation. The roof tiles, 50,000 of them, were handmade in San Juan Capistrano by Native American craftsmen using techniques unchanged since the Mission era. The wood, Philippine mahogany, Tennessee cedar, Oregon pine, arrived by special trains. The marble, sourced from the same Italian quarries that supplied Michelangelo, cost more than most houses. Yet the most revolutionary elements were invisible. Neff installed one of the first residential air conditioning systems west of the Mississippi, a massive apparatus that required its own building and a full-time engineer. The electrical system could power a small town. The plumbing included hot and cold running water in all 14 bathrooms, unheard of luxury when most Americans still used outhouses. The workers who created this paradise lived in a different world. Jose Martinez, a master plasterer who created the home's distinctive antiqued walls, lived in a boarding house in downtown Los Angeles with 8 other men. His technique, learned from his father in Guadalajara, gave Pickfair's walls their famous golden glow that seemed to capture California sunlight. Yet his name appears in no construction documents, known only through his grandson's oral history collected decades later. The kitchen represented a technological marvel hidden from public view. Designed by restaurant consultant Jean Bordeaux, it featured commercial-grade equipment that could prepare meals for 200 guests. The walk-in freezer, large enough to store a whole steer, was the first residential installation by the Carrier Corporation. The service elevator, connecting all 3 floors, moved silently on a hydraulic system that wouldn't become standard in luxury homes for another decade. Neff's masterstroke was the pool area, which would become Pickfair's most photographed feature. Rather than a simple rectangle, he created a lagoon-like design with hidden pumps that created artificial currents. The pool house, larger than most middle-class homes, included changing rooms worthy of a luxury hotel, a fully equipped bar, and a projection room where Fairbanks could screen his latest films for guests. The final cost reached $145,000, 4 times the original estimate. When accountants presented the overrun to Pickford, she reportedly smiled and said, "We're not building a house, we're building a dream. Dreams don't come with budgets." But she deducted every penny from her taxes, pioneering celebrity financial strategies still used today. As construction wrapped in March 1920, Neff watched his creation transform from architecture into mythology. Magazine photographers arrived before the paint dried. Society columnists described rooms still being furnished. The American public was touring Pickfair in their imaginations before its owners had spent a single night there. This was exactly what Pickford and Fairbanks intended. Pickfair would be America's most famous home before it was even complete. Chapter 3. The Industry of Enchantment Running. Pickfair required the precision of a military operation and the discretion of a Swiss bank. By 1925, at the height of its glory, the estate employed 34 full-time staff members, each playing a specific role in maintaining the illusion of effortless elegance that defined Hollywood's golden couple. The hierarchy began with Albert, the English butler whose last name was never recorded in any employment document, a common practice that rendered domestic workers nameless in their employers' histories. Albert managed the household with iron discipline, conducting morning inspections where a thumbprint on a champagne flute could result in immediate dismissal. He earned $200 monthly, exceptional wages that bought his silence about the private dramas he witnessed. Beneath him operated an intricate ecosystem. The cook, Marie Dressler, not the actress, commanded the kitchen with 4 assistants who began work at 4:30 a.m., preparing breakfast for staff before tackling the elaborate meals the owners required. Pickford maintained strict dietary requirements. No meal could exceed 500 calories, while Fairbanks consumed 4,000 calories daily to maintain his athletic physique. This meant preparing essentially 2 different menus for every meal, 3 times a day, every day. The laundry alone employed 3 women full-time. Pickford changed clothes 4 times daily, and each outfit required specific cleaning methods. Her white organdy dresses were washed in rainwater collected in copper cisterns, then dried in rooms where lavender burned constantly to infuse the fabric with scent. Fairbanks's fencing outfits were boiled with eucalyptus oil. The bed linens, changed daily in all 14 bedrooms whether occupied or not, were Irish linen that cost more per yard than a servant's weekly wage. The grounds crew operated as a separate fiefdom under Alejandro Morales, who had learned horticulture at the missions before the American conquest of California. His team of 8 maintained not just beauty, but meaning. Every plant had symbolic significance. The rose garden contained varieties named for each of Pickford's films. The orchid greenhouse, temperature-controlled to replicate Hawaiian conditions, produced blooms for every dinner table. Morales innovated techniques still used in California landscaping, including a drip irrigation system that reduced water usage by 60%, crucial during the periodic droughts that plagued Los Angeles. But the most complex operations involved events. A typical dinner party for 40 guests required 3 days of preparation and employed 20 additional temporary workers. The infamous Roman banquet of 1924, recreating ancient Rome for 200 guests, took 3 weeks to plan and cost $25,000, more than the average American home. Servants dressed as Roman slaves, though the irony was apparently lost on the hosts, served peacock and flamingo, actually turkey and duck artfully disguised. The evening's entertainment included lion cubs borrowed from the Selig Zoo and gladiators recruited from the USC football team. The emotional labor was as demanding as the physical work. Servants were coached in specific behaviors, how to be invisible yet anticipatory, silent yet responsive. They signed contracts forbidding them from speaking to press or writing memoirs. When a chambermaid named Rosa attempted to sell her story to Photoplay magazine in 1923, Pickford's lawyers destroyed her legally and professionally. Rosa ended up in a sanitarium, her credibility demolished, her story never told. Yet some servants wielded surprising influence. Pickford's personal maid, Lillian Rosine, effectively controlled access to the star. Studio executives courted her with gifts. Scriptwriters slipped her pages, hoping she'd leave them where Pickford might notice. Rosine accumulated enough bribes to buy apartment buildings in Los Angeles, becoming a property mogul while officially earning $50 monthly. The technology required to run Pickfair pushed domestic science to its limits. The house consumed 1,000 kilowatts of electricity monthly when most homes used 30. The heating system burned 50 tons of coal each winter. The pool filtration system, revolutionary for its time, processed 50,000 gallons daily. The ice house produced 300 pounds of ice every 24 hours. The internal telephone system, with 28 extensions, required a full-time operator during parties. Financial records from 1925 reveal the true cost of paradise. Monthly expenses averaged $12,000, equivalent to $180,000 today. The flower budget alone exceeded most Americans' annual income. The wine cellar, stocked despite prohibition, held bottles worth more than houses. The insurance policies covered jewelry, art, and furnishings valued at $2 million, protected by a security system that included armed guards, electric fences, and what may have been America's first residential motion detection system. The staff's invisible city operated parallel to the fantasy above. They lived in a separate wing with its own kitchen, dining room, and recreational facilities, comfortable but clearly demarcated as different. They had their own doctor, paid by Pickford, who treated injuries and illnesses that couldn't be allowed to interrupt service. When a kitchen worker suffered severe burns from a flambe accident during a party, she was treated in the servants' quarters while guests danced 50 feet away, oblivious. This machinery of luxury operated 365 days a year. Christmas meant larger parties, not rest. Pickford and Fairbanks might vacation in Europe, but the staff remained, maintaining empty rooms as if they were occupied. The fiction of effortlessness required constant effort. The dream needed wide-awake workers to sustain it. And for 5 extraordinary years, the system functioned flawlessly, creating the template every celebrity mansion would follow. Chapter 4. The Palace of Broken Promises. By 1927, Pickfair had transcended architecture to become pure mythology. The estate generated more newspaper coverage than the White House. But behind the perpetual sunshine of publicity photographs, storm clouds gathered in the marriage that had built this kingdom. The first cracks appeared in the breakfast room. Fairbanks, now 44, had installed special mirrors that showed him from multiple angles while he ate, allowing constant monitoring of his physique. Age terrified him. He spent 4 hours daily in his gymnasium, pursued increasingly dangerous stunts, and secretly visited a Swiss clinic for rejuvenation treatments involving monkey glands. Pickford, 34, watched her husband's desperate battle against time with growing contempt. Their schedules, once perfectly synchronized, diverged like separating continents. Pickford rose at 5 a.m. for studio calls, retiring by 9 p.m. Fairbanks began his day at noon, entertaining guests until dawn. They communicated through servants, leaving notes with Albert about dinner arrangements or travel plans. The master bedroom, once their sanctuary, became contested territory. Fairbanks moved to the guest wing, claiming his snoring disturbed his wife. Servants knew better, but said nothing. The house reflected their dissolution. Fairbanks commissioned a new wing without consulting Pickford, a Turkish bath complex costing $75,000, featuring steam rooms, massage chambers, and a cooling pool lined with tiles from Constantinople. Pickford retaliated by renovating the East Wing into a private apartment with its own entrance, allowing her to come and go without encountering her husband or his increasingly dissolute friends. Financial pressures intensified the strain. The 1927 operating costs reached $200,000 annually. Sound films threatened both careers. Fairbanks's theatrical acting style seemed suddenly antiquated, while Pickford's voice disappointed fans who'd imagined it differently. Their United Artists studio hemorrhaged money. Yet neither would reduce Pickfair's extravagance, as if admitting economic reality would acknowledge their empire's fragility. The parties grew more elaborate as the marriage deteriorated, each event a desperate performance of happiness. The New Year's Eve party of 1928 cost $40,000 and featured an artificial snowstorm in the ballroom, created by a machine borrowed from Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Guests danced in fur coats while industrial fans blew soap flakes from the ceiling. Charlie Chaplin later recalled it as the most desperately gay evening I ever endured. Servants witnessed the transformation from fairy tale to Gothic drama. The Hungarian masseuse, Ilona, treated Pickford's stress-induced migraines while listening to her employer weep about Fairbanks's affairs with younger actresses. The chauffeur, James, drove Fairbanks to clandestine meetings at the Beverly Hills Hotel, waiting hours in the parking lot. The night watchman logged Fairbanks returning at 4 a.m., 5 a.m., sometimes not at all. Yet publicly, the performance continued. When British nobility visited in 1929, Pickford and Fairbanks played the perfect hosts, leading tours of their art collection, demonstrating their his and hers gymnasiums, posing for photographers by the pool. Lord Mountbatten wrote in his diary, "They seem divinely happy, though something in Mary's eyes suggests otherwise." The Wall Street crash of October 1929 struck Pickfair like an earthquake. Fairbanks lost $2 million in 3 days. Pickford, always the shrewder investor, had diversified her holdings, but still suffered massive losses. Suddenly, Pickfair's expenses became unsustainable. Staff was reduced from 34 to 18. The orchid greenhouse was closed. The stable of riding horses was sold. For the first time, rooms were shut and furniture covered with sheets. But the emotional economy had already collapsed. Fairbanks began spending months in Europe, telegraphing excuses about film projects that didn't exist. Pickford converted the projection room into an office, working 18-hour days to save United Artists. They were together only for photographed events, arriving in separate cars, leaving through different doors. The final party at Pickfair as a couple occurred on Thanksgiving 1932. 100 guests gathered for what society columnists called the most elegant evening of the season. Pickford wore a gown that cost $5,000. Fairbanks performed acrobatics that left guests gasping. They danced together to Paradise, their wedding song, while photographers captured what would be their last public embrace. 2 weeks later, Fairbanks departed for Europe with Lady Sylvia Ashley, a British socialite half his age. He never returned to Pickfair as a resident. The divorce, finalized in January 1933, divided the empire with surgical precision. Pickford kept the house. Fairbanks took the art collection. The staff was split like children in a custody battle, some following him to Europe, others remaining in the suddenly quiet mansion. Pickford wandered Pickfair's empty rooms, a queen in an abandoned palace. The woman who'd commanded Hollywood now commanded only echoes. She ordered the pool drained. She couldn't bear seeing it without Fairbanks's diving figure. The gymnasium was locked. The Turkish bath was dismantled, its tiles sold to pay taxes. Half the house was closed, sheets covering furniture like shrouds. In her diary, discovered decades later, Pickford wrote, "The house is too large for one person, too small for the two people we became. Every room holds a ghost of who we were. I am the curator of a museum dedicated to a marriage that perhaps never existed outside of public imagination." The fairy tale was over, but Pickfair would endure, transforming from a love story into something else, a monument to the price of living in public, the cost of dreams made real. Chapter 5. The Hidden Labor of Paradise. While newspapers chronicled every dinner party and magazines analyzed every furniture choice, the true builders and maintainers of Pickfair remained invisible. Until now, recently discovered employment records and oral histories reveal the complex ecosystem of labor that sustained Hollywood's most famous fantasy. Consider Maria Gonzalez, who began working at Pickfair in 1921 at age 16. Her grandson, now a UCLA professor, preserved her journals written in Spanish, never before translated. Maria describes arriving at 4 a.m. 6 days a week, walking 3 miles from her family's apartment in Lincoln Heights, because the red car trolley didn't run early enough. Her primary job, ensuring every surface Pickford might touch was precisely the right temperature. Door handles were warmed with heated cloths in winter, cooled with ice water in summer. Pickford's morning orange juice had to be exactly 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Maria earned $8 weekly, good wages for domestic work, though Pickford spent more on a single pair of gloves. But Maria's journals reveal she understood her role in a larger performance. We are the stagehands of their daily theater. Without us, the curtain cannot rise. She describes the precise choreography required when guests arrived. Servants positioned at exact spots, trained to open doors at the perfect moment, to be visible enough to provide service, but invisible enough to maintain the illusion of a private home. The Chinese laundry workers, whose names were anglicized in employment records as Jim, Tom, and Charlie, were actually Jin Wei, Tam Lok, and Chen Liu. They operated industrial washing, machines in the basement, handling 200 pounds of laundry daily. Chen Liu developed a technique for pressing Fairbanks's shirts that became his signature, a military crispness that took 20 minutes per shirt. When Fairbanks traveled, he shipped his laundry back to Pickfair rather than trust foreign services. The garden staff represented a United Nations of expertise. Takeshi Yamamoto, former gardener to the Japanese imperial family, maintained the Zen garden installed in 1926. Giovanni Bertolini, recruited from the Villa d'Este on Lake Como, managed the Italian formal gardens. Miguel Fernandez, whose grandfather had tended the gardens at Mission San Gabriel, preserved indigenous California plants in a wild garden that Pickford claimed reminded her of her Canadian childhood. These men worked in careful coordination. their different traditions creating Pickfair's unique landscape. Yamamoto introduced meditation breaks, teaching other workers Zen breathing techniques to endure long days in the California sun. Bertolini shared wine he made from Pickfair's grapevines, technically illegal during Prohibition, but overlooked by Pickford, who appreciated European customs. Fernandez taught everyone about native plants' medicinal properties, creating an informal pharmacy that treated workplace injuries without requiring time off. The kitchen represented its own universe of exploitation and expertise. Henri Dubois, the French chef hired in 1925, commanded a salary equal to a bank president's. But his 4 assistants, 2 Mexican women, 1 Filipino man, and 1 Irish immigrant, earned minimum wages while working split shifts that kept them at Pickfair from dawn until after midnight. They prepared separate meals for the owners, the senior staff, and the junior staff, 3 different qualities of food that reinforced the estate's rigid hierarchy. The security system employed technologies and tactics borrowed from military installations. Fred Morrison, former head of security for President Wilson, installed listening devices throughout the grounds, primitive but effective microphones that picked up conversations 50 feet away. The guards, mostly former soldiers, patrolled with German shepherds trained to distinguish between residents, staff, and intruders by scent. They logged every visitor, every delivery, every unusual sound in books that filled a room in the basement. But the most remarkable story belongs to Samuel Washington, an African-American engineer who maintained Pickfair's revolutionary air conditioning system. Hired in 1924, he was the highest-paid staff member after the butler, yet he could never enter through the front door. California law didn't require such segregation, but Hollywood's unwritten rules were absolute. Washington created a workshop in the pool house where he invented improvements to the cooling system later patented by Carrier Corporation, with no credit to him. Washington's son, interviewed in 1987, recalled his father's complex feelings about Pickfair. He was proud of his work, proud of solving problems nobody else could solve. But he knew he was maintaining a palace that his own children could never enter as guests. Washington trained his replacement in 1935, a white engineer who earned twice his salary. The only photograph of Washington at Pickfair shows him from behind, adjusting machinery, his face forever turned away from history. The Great Depression intensified exploitation. As unemployment reached 25%, Pickfair's jobs became desperately coveted. Pickford reduced wages by 30% in 1931, knowing workers had no alternatives. The staff who once took pride in their positions now endured humiliation for survival. Maria Gonzalez's journal from 1932 describes servants being forced to audition their children as entertainment during parties, performing songs or dances for guests' amusement in exchange for a $5 tip. Yet solidarity emerged from shared struggle. The servants created an informal credit union, pooling resources to help families facing eviction. They established a school in the servants' quarters where those with education taught others English and arithmetic. They shared meals, medicines, and information about other employment opportunities. When Pickford discovered this mutual aid network, she attempted to forbid it, fearing organized labor. But Albert, the butler, convinced her that happy servants meant better service, and the network continued. These workers didn't just maintain a house, they created and sustained an illusion that shaped American culture. Their labor made possible the fantasy of effortless wealth that Hollywood still sells worldwide. Yet their names appear in no star biographies, their faces in no society photographs. They were the invisible hands that polished the dream until it shone so bright it blinded everyone to their presence. Chapter 6. The Second Act, Pia Zadora and the Destruction of Memory. January 1988. The morning Beverly Hills woke to catastrophe began with a simple building permit. minor renovation and seismic retrofitting. Within hours, Pickfair, the mansion that had survived earthquakes, fires, and the Great Depression, would begin its death by 1,000 cuts at the hands of its final owner, actress Pia Zadora, and her billionaire husband, Meshulam Riklis. The couple had purchased Pickfair from Mary Pickford's estate for $6.7 million in 1988, 3 years after Pickford's death. Riklis, who built his fortune through leveraged buyouts of companies like Samsonite and Elizabeth Arden, saw the estate as the ultimate trophy. Zadora, whose acting career peaked with a Golden Globe for Butterfly, a film her husband financed, believed owning Pickfair would finally grant her Hollywood legitimacy. They were catastrophically wrong. Within weeks of moving in, Zadora complained to reporters about bad vibes and claimed the house was haunted. She described seeing Pickford's ghost in the entrance hall, Fairbanks's spirit by the pool. Whether genuine paranoia or calculated publicity, her statements began Pickfair's transformation from landmark to liability. The renovation started innocently. Contractors removed original Philippine mahogany paneling, claiming termite damage that inspection reports didn't support. The hand-painted Chinese wallpaper in the dining room, valued at $100,000, was stripped because Zadora found it depressing. The Venetian stained glass windows, installed by Fairbanks in 1923, were replaced with modern thermal panes for energy efficiency. Harold Peterson, a craftsman hired for the renovation, later testified in preservation hearings about what he witnessed. "They had us destroying things that belonged in museums. Original Batchelder tiles were jackhammered out. Hand-carved ceiling beams were chainsawed because they were too dark. I kept asking if they wanted to save anything for historical value. They laughed." The Beverly Hills Historical Society attempted intervention. President Dorothy Campbell filed emergency petitions to grant Pickfair landmark status, which would protect it from demolition. But Riklis's lawyers argued that the house had been modified too many times to qualify as historically significant, modifications that were happening under their own direction. The city council, influenced by campaign contributions from Riklis's associates, voted against protection. By March 1990, the excuse for complete demolition emerged: earthquake damage. Engineers hired by Riklis declared the structure unsafe, though city inspectors found no significant damage from recent tremors. The couple received demolition permits in record time, 48 hours instead of the usual 6 weeks. Beverly Hills Planning Commissioner Sandra Klein later called it the most suspicious approval I'd seen in 20 years. The demolition began on March 27, 1990. Television crews gathered as wrecking balls swung into walls where Einstein had discussed relativity, where Roosevelt had planned the New Deal, where Churchill had strategized World War II. Each blow erased not just architecture, but memory. Workers discovered treasures in the walls, love letters between Pickford and Fairbanks, hidden during their divorce, Chaplin's sketches for Modern Times, apparently forgotten after a dinner party, a safe containing $50,000 in gold coins from the 1920s. These artifacts disappeared into private collections or were simply discarded. No archaeological survey was required or conducted. The servants' quarters revealed their own archaeology. In the walls, workers found photographs hidden by staff members, images of their families, their home countries, their real lives beyond servitude. A Filipino worker's passport from 1925, Maria Gonzalez's rosary, Samuel Washington's engineering notebooks, filled with innovations never credited to him. These fragments of invisible lives were bulldozed with everything else. Meanwhile, Zadora gave interviews from her temporary residence, claiming the house fought the renovation. She described walls that bled, rooms that changed temperature suddenly, voices in empty hallways. Whether psychological projection or publicity stunt, Her Gothic narrative transformed Pickfair's destruction from vandalism into exorcism in public perception. The new house, completed in 1992, bore no resemblance to its predecessor. A 25,000-square-foot Mediterranean-style mansion, it featured a bowling alley, a disco, and a gift-wrapping room. The pool where Fairbanks had performed now housed a grotto with artificial waterfalls. The rose garden became a helipad. The Zen garden was paved for additional parking. Every trace of Pickfair's identity was systematically erased. But the destruction went beyond physical demolition. Riklis and Zadora refused access to historians documenting the house. They burned papers and photographs deemed unimportant. They sold fixtures and furnishings without documenting their provenance. The Wallace Neff archives estimate that 90% of Pickfair's historical record was destroyed between 1988 and 1992. The couple's marriage collapsed simultaneously with the house. By 1993, they divorced, with Zadora claiming the renovated mansion in the settlement. She lived there briefly, hosting parties that desperately mimicked old Hollywood glamour, but felt like seances in a cemetery. Guests reported feeling uncomfortable, as if the new house was built on sacred ground, which, culturally speaking, it was. Local historian Robert Winter called it the greatest act of cultural vandalism in Beverly Hills history. The destruction of Pickfair represented more than losing a house. It was the erasure of a foundational myth. The mansion that taught America how to worship celebrity, that created the template for public privacy, that embodied the promises and contradictions of the American dream, was reduced to landfill. In 2005, Zadora sold the property for $17.5 million to Korean businessman Corey Hong. She told reporters she was glad to leave, claiming the ghost of Mary Pickford had never stopped haunting her, a final insult to the woman whose home she destroyed. The new Pickfair stands today, unrecognizable and largely forgotten, a grave marker for a more elegant age of illusion. Chapter 7. The Ghosts in the Archives. The destruction of Pickfair's physical structure in 1990 seemed to erase its history forever. But in 2015, a discovery in a Pasadena storage unit began recovering the mansion's lost stories. The unit, abandoned after a renter's death, contained 14 boxes of documents, photographs, and recordings labeled simply PF Staff. The treasure belonged to Eleanor Martinez, daughter of Maria Gonzalez, the Pickfair maid whose journals had partially survived. Eleanor had spent decades collecting testimonies from former Pickfair employees and their descendants, creating an underground archive of the estate's invisible history. Her materials revealed dimensions of Pickfair that official histories had buried. Among the most remarkable discoveries were wax cylinder recordings from 1924, featuring servants describing their daily routines. The scratchy voices speak in various languages: Spanish, Tagalog, Cantonese, Italian, translated by their children years later. One recording captures the kitchen staff singing work songs, timing food preparation to rhythm. Another preserves Samuel Washington explaining his air conditioning system, his pride evident despite the racism that limited his recognition. Photographs showed spaces never documented in architectural magazines. The servants' dining room with its long wooden tables and mismatched chairs, the basement laundry with women working in 100-degree heat, the hidden stairways servants used to move invisibly through the house. These images revealed Pickfair's true structure, not just the glamorous facade, but the complex machinery that sustained it. Financial ledgers exposed the economics of servitude. While Pickford spent $200 on a single dinner party centerpiece, the flower arranger who created it earned $3 for 12 hours of work. The seamstress who altered Pickford's gowns, sometimes working through the night before events, made less per week than the cost of thread for one dress. The pool maintenance worker who ensured the water was perfectly clear for Fairbanks's morning swim couldn't afford swimming lessons for his own children. Medical records documented workplace injuries never reported to authorities. Burns from kitchen accidents, falls from ladder while cleaning chandeliers, respiratory problems from chemical cleaners, all treated quietly to avoid disrupting service. Dr. William Chen, who provided underground medical care to Chinese workers, kept detailed notes about conditions he called servitude syndrome, chronic pain from repetitive labor, anxiety from constant surveillance, depression from family separation. The archive included letters between separated families. Juan Morales wrote to his wife in Mexico, describing the strange world of Pickfair while sending money home. His letters reveal a man caught between gratitude for employment and rage at his treatment. They pay me well to be invisible. I polish silver worth more than our village while my children grow up without me. Is this success or tragedy? Eleanor Martinez had also recorded oral histories in the 1970s and 80s, capturing stories from aging servants before they died. These tapes, transferred to digital format by UCLA's Center for Oral History Research, provide the only surviving voices of people who built and maintained Pickfair. They describe not just their work, but their dreams, fears, and observations of the famous figures they served. One recording features James Patterson, the Irish chauffeur, describing driving Einstein to Pickfair. The great man asked me about my family, my education. When I told him I'd left school at 12 to work, he spent the entire ride teaching me mathematics, writing equations on the fogged windows of the Rolls-Royce. He said every mind deserved cultivation. Miss Pickford never asked me a single personal question in 15 years. The collection revealed resistance and solidarity among workers. They created codes to warn each other about employers' moods. They shared tips about which agencies paid better wages. They organized informal strikes, all calling in sick simultaneously when conditions became unbearable. They maintained their own cultural practices in the servants' quarters, celebrating Filipino festivals, Mexican Saints' Days, Chinese New Year, creating a multicultural community invisible to their employers. Perhaps most poignantly, the archive contained items servants saved from Pickfair's demolition. Workers hired to clear the house before destruction secretly preserved fragments, doorknobs, tiles, pieces of woodwork. These relics were distributed among former employees' families like pieces of the true cross, tangible connections to their invisible history. The Martinez archive also documented the aftermath of Pickfair's destruction on its former workers. Many experienced grief similar to losing a family home. Some gathered for informal wakes, sharing memories of the estate. Others felt relief, the sight of their servitude finally erased. But all felt their history had been demolished along with the walls. Maria Gonzalez's complete journals, discovered in the collection, ended with a reflection written in 1975, 50 years after she began working at Pickfair. I spent my youth maintaining their fantasy. My hands knew every surface of that house better than they knew my own children's faces. Now I wonder, did we preserve something beautiful or participate in our own erasure? Were we artists of service or accomplices to exploitation? I have no answer, only these words to prove we existed. The Martinez archive forced historians to reconfront Pickfair's meaning. It wasn't just a mansion where celebrities lived, but a site where American dreams and immigrant realities collided. The recovered materials transformed Pickfair from a nostalgic symbol of Hollywood glamour into a complex text about labor, race, and the cost of maintaining paradise. The ghosts in the archives weren't supernatural, but historical. The spectral presence of workers written out of the story they made possible. Chapter 8. The Mansion's Modern Mythology. Today, the site of Pickfair generates more interest as absence than the current structure does as presence. The new mansion at 1143 Summit Drive, virtually invisible behind gates and foliage, attracts ghost tours, architecture students, and Hollywood historians seeking traces of what vanished. But Pickfair's true afterlife exists not in Beverly Hills, but in the global imagination, where it continues to shape how we understand celebrity, privacy, and the American dream. The estate's influence on celebrity culture remains inescapable. Every gated compound, every paparazzi-proof wall, every carefully staged, candid photograph of stars at home descends from Pickford and Fairbanks's innovations. When Beyoncé and Jay-Z release curated glimpses of their mansion life, they follow Pickfair's blueprint. When tech billionaires build compounds that merge public achievement with private mystique, they pursue Pickfair's promise. Contemporary Beverly Hills real estate agent Linda Stevens, who specializes in celebrity properties, explains Pickfair's lasting impact. Every major star wants their own Pickfair, not the house itself, but what it represented. Complete control over their image while maintaining the illusion of intimacy with the public. The tragedy is that the original was destroyed just as we began understanding its historical importance. Film location scouts still request Pickfair-style estates for period productions. The criteria: Mediterranean Revival architecture, extensive grounds, rooms that photograph as both intimate and grand. But nothing matches the original's specific alchemy. Directors like Paul Thomas Anderson and Quentin Tarantino have incorporated Pickfair into films not as location, but as idea. The mansion that exists more powerfully as memory than reality. Academic study of Pickfair has intensified since the Martinez Archives discovery. UCLA's School of Architecture offers a seminar called The Pickfair Paradox: Labor and Luxury in American Architecture. The course examines how grand estates depend on invisible infrastructure and workers, using Pickfair as the primary case study. Students create speculative reconstructions of the servants' quarters, the kitchen systems, the hidden passages that official floor plans never showed. The University of Southern California's School of Cinematic Arts maintains the Pickfair collection. Not objects from the house, but materials about its influence on film history. Every movie that featured mansion life, from Sunset Boulevard to Parasite, connects to Pickfair's prototype. The collection includes scripts with margin notes about recreating Pickfair elegance and production designs inspired by memories of the estate. Digital archaeologists have created virtual reconstructions using surviving photographs, architectural plans, and newly discovered servant testimonies. The VR experience, Pickfair 1925, allows users to walk through the estate at its peak, but also to shift perspective, seeing the house from a servant's view, revealing the hidden passages, the basement workspaces, the parallel geography of labor. The project's creator, Marina Chen, explains, "We wanted to restore not just the mansion, but the complete ecosystem that sustained it. Urban explorers and paranormal investigators regularly attempt to access the current property, believing original Pickfair elements survive. Security reports document monthly trespass attempts. Some seekers claim the destroyed mansion exists in parallel dimensions, accessible through meditation or seance. While dismissible as fantasy, these beliefs reflect Pickfair's transformation from place to myth. The economic impact of Pickfair's destruction continues rippling through preservation battles nationwide. When developers target historic properties, preservationists invoke another Pickfair, shorthand for irreplaceable cultural loss. The National Trust for Historic Preservation created the Pickfair Principle, guidelines for protecting culturally significant properties even after substantial modifications. Contemporary artists engage Pickfair's ghost through various media. Photographer Lauren Greenfield created Invisible Pickfair, documenting the current mansion while digitally inserting translucent figures representing servants from the 1920s. Performance artist Maria Santos staged Cleaning Pickfair, a 12-hour piece where she meticulously cleaned a Beverly Hills mansion while reciting Maria Gonzalez's journals. Street artist Banksy allegedly planned an installation at the site before security improvements made access impossible. The mansion appears in video games as setting and metaphor. Grand Theft Auto, Los Angeles 1925, features a mission infiltrating a Pickfair analog to steal incriminating photographs. The Sims, Golden Age includes a downloadable Pickfair replica where players manage both celebrity hosts and servant staff. These games make players complicit in the exploitation Pickfair represented while enjoying its aesthetic pleasures. Social media perpetuates Pickfair mythology daily. Instagram accounts like @Lost Pickfair share historical photographs that generate millions of views. TikTok creators produce Pickfair Facts videos mixing truth and legend. The hashtag #ChuckPickfair has been used over 10 million times, attached to everything from mansion tours to discussions of labor rights. The estate has achieved its ultimate transformation, from physical space to digital specter. But the most profound modern engagement with Pickfair comes from descendants of its workers. The Gonzalez-Martinez Family Foundation, established by Maria Gonzalez's great-grandchildren, provides scholarships for first-generation college students from domestic worker families. Their mission statement declares, "We transform the invisible labor of our ancestors into visible opportunities for their descendants." The foundation recently acquired a Beverly Hills property 3 blocks from Pickfair's site, converting it into the Domestic Workers History Center. The center documents not just Pickfair, but the entire ecosystem of estates that Hollywood's golden age required. It challenges visitors to see luxury through the eyes of those who created and maintained it. In 2023, the city of Beverly Hills finally acknowledged Pickfair's destruction as a cultural loss, installing a historical marker at Summit Drive and Pickfair Way. But the real monument exists in how we now understand celebrity culture's dependence on invisible labor, the price of manufactured dreams, and the violence of erasing history for convenience. Pickfair's absence speaks louder than its presence ever did. Chapter 9. Lessons from the Ruins. Word count 928. What does Pickfair teach us about American dreams and their discontents? The mansion's rise, transformation, and erasure create a text that reads differently with each generation's interpretation. Today, as wealth inequality reaches levels unseen since Pickfair's heyday, as domestic workers remain largely invisible, as celebrity culture consumes ever more resources, the estate's story offers both warnings and possibilities. The architectural historian Dolores Hayden argues that Pickfair represents the primal scene of American celebrity culture, the moment when private life became a public commodity. Every reality TV show, every social media influencer, every carefully curated lifestyle brand traces its genealogy to Pickford and Fairbanks's innovation, selling intimacy while maintaining distance, offering access while ensuring exclusion. But Pickfair also pioneered the architecture of inequality that defines American luxury. The house literally built walls between those who owned and those who served, creating separate entrances, separate spaces, separate realities. Contemporary estates maintain these divisions through technology rather than architecture, apps that summon workers, cameras that surveil them, contracts that silence them. But the fundamental structure remains unchanged. The economist Thomas Piketty references Pickfair in his analysis of wealth concentration, noting how the estate's operating costs required an entire ecosystem of low-wage labor. Pickfair wasn't just a house, he writes. It was a wealth extraction machine that concentrated resources from many into the hands of few while disguising exploitation as employment. The same dynamics operate in today's gig economy, where multiple jobs are required to service single wealthy households. Labor organizer Dolores Huerta draws different lessons from Pickfair's history. She sees in the servants' mutual aid networks a preview of contemporary organizing among domestic workers. The National Domestic Workers Alliance uses Pickfair's servant testimonies in training materials, showing how workers have always found ways to support each other despite attempts to isolate them. Environmental scientists study Pickfair as an early example of resource excess that presaged current climate crisis. The estate's water usage during California droughts, its energy consumption, its maintenance of non-native plants requiring constant irrigation, all preview contemporary environmental conflicts between luxury and sustainability. The rose garden that required more water than 10 working-class households symbolizes choices California still confronts. Psychologists examine Pickfair syndrome, the psychological cost of maintaining public perfection. Pickford and Fairbanks's marriage collapsed under the weight of performing happiness. Their successor residents, from Buddy Rogers to Pia Zadora, reported depression, anxiety, and paranoia within Pickfair's walls. The house designed to showcase success became a prison of expectation. Today's social media influencers experience similar pressures, curating perfect lives while suffering private breakdowns. Urban planners see in Pickfair's destruction a cautionary tale about historic preservation. Los Angeles lost not just a house, but a teaching tool, a site where American myths could be examined rather than merely consumed. The failure to protect Pickfair led to stronger preservation laws, but also revealed how wealth can override cultural value when the two conflict. Film scholars recognize Pickfair as Hollywood's rosebud, the object whose loss explains an entire worldview. Just as Citizen Kane's sled represented irretrievable innocence, Pickfair's demolition marked the end of Hollywood's ability to control its own narrative. Once the mansion fell, the industry's carefully constructed myths became vulnerable to deconstruction. The feminist historian Mary Beard interprets Pickfair through gender dynamics, noting how Pickford's business acumen was hidden behind domestic performance. She ran a corporation from a mansion, using femininity as camouflage for unprecedented female power. But the performance exhausted her, and the house that enabled her authority also constrained it. Contemporary female executives navigate similar contradictions, wielding power while performing approachability. Critical race theorists examine how Pickfair perpetuated racial hierarchies through spatial segregation. The estate's employment of workers of color in service positions, while excluding them from guest lists, created a template for inclusive exclusion, visible presence with invisible humanity. These patterns persist in contemporary Hollywood, where diversity initiatives coexist with systemic inequalities. But Pickfair also offers models for resistance and recovery. The Martinez Archive demonstrates how marginalized communities preserve their own histories despite institutional erasure. The servants' children who became teachers, doctors, and activists show how exploitation can generate determination. The foundation established by worker descendants transforms historical injustice into contemporary opportunity. Young architects study Pickfair's destruction as inspiration for adaptive reuse rather than demolition. They imagine alternative histories where the mansion became a museum, a cultural center, or affordable housing that honored rather than erased its complex past. These speculative projects challenge the assumption that progress requires erasure. Writers find in Pickfair a metaphor for American literature itself, grand narratives built on invisible labor, sustained by myth, vulnerable to revision. The novelist Colson Whitehead calls Pickfair the great American ghost story, not because it's haunted, but because it haunts us with questions about who builds dreams and who pays for them. Perhaps Pickfair's greatest lesson is that no monument to power is permanent. The mansion that seemed eternal lasted barely 70 years. Its destruction reminds us that what seems solid can vanish, that preservation requires active choice, that memory needs material anchors. But it also suggests that stories survive structures, that the workers' testimonies outlasted the walls they maintained, that truth emerges from ruins. As America confronts its own myths about merit, about progress, about dreams accessible to all, Pickfair provides a template for examination. Not the glamorous surface, but the complete structure. Not just the owners, but the workers. Not only the performance, but its price. In the space where Pickfair stood, absences speak louder than presences, teaching us to see what was hidden, hear who was silenced, and remember what power would prefer we forget. Chapter 10. Conclusion: The house that Hollywood forgot to remember. Stand today at the intersection of Summit Drive and Pickfair Way, and you'll see nothing remarkable. A gate, a hedge, a glimpse of tile roof that belongs to a mansion with no memory of what it replaced. Tourists occasionally stop, confused, checking their maps for the Pickfair they've read about. But they're 70 years too late, looking for a ghost that was buried without ceremony or marker. Yet Pickfair's absence reverberates louder than most mansions' presence. In its erasure, we find America's central contradiction, the simultaneous worship and destruction of its own mythology. We build dreams into architecture, then demolish them when they become inconvenient. We celebrate success while hiding the labor that enables it. We preserve facades while gutting foundations. This documentary has taken you behind the hedges and through the service entrances, into the kitchens and laundry rooms where Pickfair's reality lived. We've heard from the silenced workers whose names were never recorded in guest books, but whose labor made every party possible. We've seen how two actors built a palace that taught America to worship celebrity, then watched that palace devour their marriage and, ultimately, itself. But Pickfair's story isn't finished. Right now, in Los Angeles, domestic workers clean houses they'll never own for people they'll never equal. Architects design servant quarters with separate entrances. Celebrity culture sells intimacy while enforcing distance. The patterns Pickfair established continue, unnamed but unmistakable. The question isn't whether we'll build new Pickfairs. We already are. The question is whether we'll remember the complete story this time. Not just the glamour, but the labor. Not just the parties, but their price. Not just the dreams, but who pays for them. Will we preserve the next Pickfair? Or will we let another developer demolish it for something newer, bigger, more forgetful? History isn't just what we choose to remember, but what we fight to preserve. Every mansion tells two stories, one in the grand rooms, another in the basement, one in the photographs, another in the pay stubs, one in the biographies, another in the silence. If this documentary has revealed anything, let it be this: the most important histories are often the most hidden. The greatest mansions are built on the smallest wages, and the American dream has always required someone to stay awake maintaining it. Remember Pickfair. Not the fairy tale, but the factory. Not the illusion, but the labor. Not the myth, but the truth. In that remembering, we might finally see our own reflection clearly.